Good evening, everyone. This work session of the Board of Trustees of the Spring Independent School District is officially called to order on Thursday, March 4th, 2021. The time is now 6:03 p.m. Board trustees present: Winfred Adams Jr., Kelly Hodges, Deborah Jensen, Justine Durant, Jana Gonzalez, and myself, Rhonda Newhouse. I would like to ask everyone to turn off or silence their cell phones or electronic devices at this time. Thank you. The first order of business tonight is a review of the minutes from previous meetings. Does any trustee have any changes or corrections to the minutes of the February 4th, 2021 board work session or the February 9th, 2021 regular meeting?
Madam President, I don't have change, but I just wanted to say again, is it Mr. Sheffer, are you the one who does our minutes? I can't tell you how much I appreciate these. I noticed they even have the time in the video that is attached to each topic. There's times we are studying issues that go over months, and it is really helpful for me to go back to those minutes and read what we actually said and what was presented. So thank you so much.
Thank you. These items will be submitted as a part of the consent agenda at the March 9th, 2021 Board of Trustees regular meeting. We will now hear from our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Rodney Watson.
Thank you, President Newhouse and other trustees, and good evening. Thank you all so much for being here. As I'm sure you can imagine, it's almost a year since this pandemic started, and as we all know, there's never been a dull moment in a year. There's been a lot that's been going on here in the district as well as in the media as it relates to COVID-19 and masks and things of that nature. We are going to have a discussion on Tuesday regarding the policy that we already have in place. And I think more than anything, when we were reviewing the updates this week, it was a blessing for us to be able to know that the forework that you all already put into policy in the Student Code of Conduct and our handbook is already there. And so we'll review that on Tuesday. We do have a very straightforward agenda tonight. There's a couple of presentations we're going to do. Our middle of the year response. We have our assistant superintendents of schools. They're going to be leading us through that discussion. I think last month you asked, okay, we've seen the data, but what are we going to do about it? So tonight we're going to be talking about what we're doing about it. In addition to that, which is going to actually be our first presentation, Ms. Westbrooks is going to come and talk about the budget as we're planning for the 2021 22 budget, and then we're going to go through the rest of the agenda. And so I'll say the rest of my comments for Tuesday. Thank you all very much.
Madam President, is it out of order for us to give our Superintendent of the Year with the National Foundations Association a standing ovation?
This is a perfect time, Dr.
Come on,
For those that are not familiar, our superintendent won the National School Foundation of the Year Superintendent's Award. And this is a first. We have put it in, we have publicized it to others. And I think we're going to have another little celebration maybe Tuesday, Debbie, but this is perfect timing. Thank you. Because I know many have heard about it, and we're so honored and pleased about the work that our superintendent does and the close relationship that he has with the Spring ISD Foundation. They truly appreciate him and applaud him for the kindness, his consideration in working with the foundation. So it's an honor to be a part of the foundation and recognize him. Hey, We were so happy. So we will hear more about this on Tuesday. Thank you. Our next item is agenda participation. This item allows members of the public an opportunity to speak on agenda items before these items are considered by the board. Mr. Binkley, do we have anyone registered to speak under agenda participation tonight?
No, Madam President, we do not.
Okay. So we will continue, and I'd like to recognize our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Rodney Watson, again, to introduce the 2021 middle of year student academic update.
Absolutely. We're going to go ahead and do that. If I could ask you to go out of order, we have a guest that's online for the budget, and instead of having him wait to talk about the budget, if it's okay, can we go to Ann's presentation and come back to the school?
Yes, we sure can.
We'll turn it over to Ms. Westbrooks.
Thank you, Dr. Watson and President Newhouse. The item that Dr. Watson is referring to is the request for a proposal for property insurance. And that item is listed on the agenda as item number, it's under the CFO item E. And so if you would turn with me to page 109, that's the documentation that we wanted to talk through with you all this evening. So if you recall, around this time last year, it was the last board meeting that we had in person before we were closed for the pandemic. And we had our, at the time, a property insurance agent come out and speak to the Board of Trustees regarding a significant increase in the price of our premium. And at that time, our premium increased by over 70%. And that was a tremendous increase that was quite unexpected. But we know that as we have storms and hurricanes and things of that nature, that our insurance premium will increase, but we weren't anticipating anything of that nature, quite that much. And so just to do our due diligence and ensuring that we're getting the best pricing for Spring ISD, we worked with an outside consultant, which is Mr. Robert Ream, who's on the line with us this evening if the board has any questions for him. And we hired him on. He's an expert in insurance and works with several districts across the state of Texas with property insurance and helps with the request for proposal process with lots of districts. So he has a wealth of knowledge. We hired him on to do a review of the district's coverage, our deductibles, our exposures, and he did a review of our pricing structure. And what came out of that review is that we felt as though we did not have a very competitive rate with our property insurance. And there was also some opportunities for us to look deeper in our statement of values for our properties throughout the district. And so he gave lots of feedback and lots of information to us that led us to go out for a request for proposal. And so we pushed through and put this proposal out over the Christmas holidays, and we're able to receive a favorable result. It's still much more than what we were paying before, but all of the pricing and the terms of the request for proposal came back in our favor, and we're able to save the district $670,000 compared to the previous year's insurance premium. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. And this item is hopefully on the consent agenda for Tuesday night, but it was certainly worthy of bringing it back to you all so that you know that we did do our due diligence as a district, and it did prove to be in our favor. And as I mentioned, Mr. Ream is on the line if there are any questions regarding the policy or anything of that nature that he can assist us with.
Ms. Westbrooks, I see that we sent out the RP to 7 and only got 2 responses.
Yes.
One of those responses is the original company.
Incumbent.
So they came back with a better proposal than what they had offered us.
They did come back with a better proposal, but that is not the proposal that we went with, because another company who we are recommending for the district award to was actually better than our incumbent vendor. So the rate that was quoted to us was better than our original rate with our incumbent vendor, but we had another vendor that came in with an even better, more advantageous rate for us.
I remember being quite upset Price, uh, when that happened, and they may have forestalled us going through this process if they had been able to make some sort of course correction as it relates to what they were charging. But, and I'm also a little concerned that there were only two responders.
Yeah.
And what's that mean for the future in terms of whether we insure all of officers?
And Mr. Ram, I don't know if he wants to speak to that as far as how we layer
I'm,
out.
I'm
Yes,
sorry.
it's
He
quite
cut out
complicated.
on me, and I did not hear the question. I apologize.
Okay, the question, Mr. Rame, is there's concern regarding the fact that we only had 2 responses to the RFP, and if that has an impact on our ability to be fully insured in the future. And so if this would be an excellent opportunity to talk through the process of how we assign and how we approach the RFP and how they return the first $25 million layer and how that's all built out.
Thank you. The problem that we have today in insuring properties that are close to the coast is there just aren't enough insurance companies that want to take on that risk. So when we had 7 agents respond to offer proposals, I'm sorry, 7 agents were invited. 4 of those, including TASB, because TASB will not write insurance in the coastal area. 4 of them did not even respond. And the reason is because there are just not enough companies to offer the proposal that you need. Now, there are, in your case, and this is not unusual, there are 20 different insurance companies involved. So you can see that you can't spread out give 7 agents 20 different insurance companies. There are just not that many available. And so what we've had to do is we've had to develop a method to limit that. We went out to market and 3 responded, including Gallagher, who had your insurance several years ago. They requested companies that we would already assign to 2 local agents. Both of the agents, I say local, McGriff, the awardee that we presume, is from Houston. Frost has a Houston office, but they're based in San Antonio. So what we did when we asked for them to give us the first $25 million layer, based on who had the best $25 million layer, we then assigned all of the available companies to the awardee of the 25 million layer, such that there were enough companies out there that the district could get the best possible price, having checked with every insurance market that is available. Where we made the initial decision was comparing that 25 million, and in that 25 million, there was a significant savings to go with McGriff. And that, excuse me.
You still there?
Yes. Are there any other questions?
Mr. Adams, did that?
Not really. So I have a concern for what this process will look like. And I mean, I want to say 10 years, but I don't even think, it doesn't feel like we even have that much time. This last week, it would seem to me like we have broken insurance in Texas, right? He's talking about a $25 million layer. but there must be claims from every school district, every business, every institution in the state. And I don't understand how insurance companies are going to be able to meet their obligations. And so my question is about like, are we going to be in a situation at some point where we need to seek federal help to insure all of our facilities? I mean, and Janet, you're the banker here. I wonder about what this looks like the next time we have to go out for RFP and nobody comes back with a response.
And that's a valid concern. And that's where we are now. And you see that there's a lot less players that are coming out and are willing to put themselves out for the amount of risk that we have. We do have a portfolio that's small compared to some of even our neighboring districts of over $1.5 billion in value. And so it's a valid concern. I don't think there is an answer for that this evening, but it is a valid concern, and we see it because there are less and less companies that are willing to even come to the table and offer. And so I think it's yet to be seen, but the events that just took place this month are making that more and more likely, to your point, that just the landscape of insurance as a whole is going to change significantly in the very near future.
Now, where you have some level what's the word I'm trying to think of? One of the things we have to remember is that under FEMA, you have to purchase an amount of insurance that makes sense. In other words, they're not going to let Spring ISD purchase $10 million and then come in when you have a $100 million claim for a hurricane. They're not going to let you get by with that. But at the present time, with our $100 million for hurricane, that certainly is adequate to satisfy FEMA's. Now, the question that many of us have is FEMA going to be there? But at least from the near term, we have them as a backup. Although we don't want to use them because districts who have used FEMA, including your own, have not found that a particularly easy method of dealing.
Mr. Rhyme, this is Debbie Jensen. I actually do have a question. Could you explain to me what's the difference between damaged property only deductible and damaged locations deductible?
Well, yes. Take a location where you might have several buildings. Well, I'll give you an example of one of my clients. A community college has most of their buildings at one campus. So one of my clients had 17 buildings at one campus, at one address. During Hurricane Harvey, only 13 of those buildings were damaged. The insurance company applied the deductible to all 17 buildings. So it's important that they apply only to the damaged buildings. That's an important distinction. Good question. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much.
One of the things that was interesting, and this will not last, we had a rate guarantee for 2022 if our loss ratio is less than 30%. I have not seen a rate guarantee in about 4 years. So it looked, but I'll guarantee it's not going to be available next year.
Thank you, Mr. Rain. Were there any additional questions? Not? Then we're excited about the savings. We know it's going to be difficult going forward, but we'll continue to do our part to get favorable pricing for the district and weather the storm literally and figuratively as we go forward.
I do want to say I do appreciate that we did this, that we were proactive about this. That's great work. Thank you, Ms. Westbrook.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Westbrooks and Mr. Rim. Thank you. We will now return back to our superintendent to let him make a presentation.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Dr. Perez to come up. They're going to share with you what we're going to be doing to work on the data that we presented to you all for the past couple of months. Dr. Perez.
Okay, so give me just a moment while I set myself up. Okay, excellent. So thank you so much for your patience. Took me a little bit longer than expected. Okay, so first and foremost, I want to tell you that we're super excited to come back and bring back a district response. I have in the back several of my colleagues are assistant superintendents. We're a small team, but a mighty team, right? We cry together, we work together, and we literally laugh and celebrate together. And so I did want to start us off with starting where we left off, okay? And so where did we left off last time? Well, we left off with being able to come up with a district-wide response. So tonight, I'm going to be talking about the 2021 middle of the year student academic update as a response. And what you will see and what you will hear are district-aligned expectations and some strategic planning behind the scenes that we're gonna bring forth to you. And so as we go through the presentation, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and just ask the questions, and or we are going to share a lot of information. And so if you also wait, you might get some of your questions answered, but go ahead. If you have anything that you need to comment on and or ask, feel free to do so, okay? So let's go ahead and take us back. And so literally about a month ago, we picked up where we left, where Don, one of our other colleagues, was presenting data for math for the middle of the school year. And so one of our initial first steps was to really look at how can we better define our EOC goals related to the end of the school year STAR, which is coming in May. And so part of our first step was for us to set clear EOI district-wide reading and math achievement goals. And we have to go back and remind the campus leaders, hey, these are our goals, right? So we have to be very clear about that. The second step was for us to develop and implement a district-wide strategy to improve reading and math achievement, right? So that's part of the process that we're going to go through tonight, and we'll be sharing with you some of those details in the very next few minutes. Related to our support and supervision, that's where the assistant superintendents come into play, right? And so part of our work is to provide individual campus feedback and recommendations in order for us to help the campus leaders adjust and modify their plan, as they're the ones who will be implementing these strategies to close the gaps between the student groups, right? And so for the purpose of this presentation, closing the gaps, I'm going to use the term of the opportunity gap, okay? Because we have an opportunity to make a difference with the scholars every single day. And so for the purpose of today, I'm going to use to close the opportunity gap. And so finally, once we've been able to provide support, the campus develops their action plan. The next step is, well, how are we going to evaluate what we're doing or what we're going to do so that we can monitor and track the progress? And so having said that, I'm going to talk about specifically of how we're going to do that in the next few slides, okay? And so, but I want us to bring us back that part of our focus is to get students from an approaches to a meets grade level expectations, and from a meets to an actual mastering their grade level expectations. And so in doing so, we have to identify the students, right? We have to identify the scholars. And as we're doing that, we have to identify the student groups, okay? And we had some I think it's super important for us to step back and to think about this from an equity standpoint, right? So if we're looking at this from that standpoint. We have to identify who the students are, right? Who are the scholars that have language needs, right? Who are the scholars that have special needs? Who are the actual scholars that are Hispanic and that are African American, that are potentially have been historically underserved for now some time, and what can we do about it now? So despite what's going on with the pandemic, with the freeze, we thought we had a hold of something going on right now, but then something always comes back in front of us, right? And so what we do have control is what we do within the classroom and within our school time, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, and so I think before I get started with the details, I wanted to give you an update related to STAR and our EOC assessment that we'll be taking at the end of the school year. And so to start us off with, I wanted to let you know that TEA has determined that we will not have a state accountability indicators for the 2021 school year. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing for us to keep top of mind is that ESSA, which is our federal accountability, they have yet to determine what that's going to look like. Okay, so we're still waiting. Once they make a determination, they'll let TEA know, they'll let the state, and then they'll go back and let the LEAs, which are local education agencies, which is us. And then at that point, we'll be able to communicate and figure out what we need to do based on that decision. Things that we do know. So let's talk about those. The first thing that we do know is that STAR will be administered in person. Okay, we've heard a lot of frenziness with all these news and different articles being put out there, but what we do know is that the STAR would be administered in person. However, for the students that are currently receiving at-home or remote instruction, those students will not be required to test. Okay, so then we thought about, so what does that mean for spring ISD and what can we do about that? And so part of our response to that is to not only encourage, but to communicate with parents, students, and staff members that we want to encourage all students to take the test, right? And why do we want to do that? We want to do that because the data that we get from that will be invaluable now at the end of May when we're going to be taking the STAR, but more importantly, as we move forward for the next year, okay? And so related to the actual, I'm going to shift gears to high school now. And so related to high school, what we do know is the requirement is for high school students, they must pass and take their EOCs as a requirement for graduation. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second piece related to spring ISD as a whole, we are going to be taking the students, right? They're going to be taking the STAR online at the campus. And so our teachers and we will be administering that in May. And while we do, again, anticipate that because of what's going on, that we might have lower participation, we're going to make sure that we communicate and encourage our families and communities to make sure that they do play a role in being active and actually take the test, okay? And so as I'm transitioning to my next slide, which is about developing and implementing a district-wide strategy for math and reading, I want us to maybe kind of put ourselves on maybe a coaching hat, right? And so imagine that I'm a baseball coach, right? And so I'm trying to teach the student athlete how to swing a baseball, right? And so as I'm doing that, my goal is to do what? For the student to swing the ball and to hit the ball, right? Ultimately. Now, while we want them to hit a home run, right now we want them to actually swing and hit the ball. And so in order to do that, we've got to break up or break down all those movements into skills, okay? Small skills that will leading up to an outcome. And so what I'm going to show you right now is literally part of our plan. And so what we went ahead and did is we looked at all of the standards, which are the TEKS, right? And so we looked at district-wide standards for reading, and that's what you see in front of you from grades 3 through 8, and also English 1 and English 2, which are high school EOC assessments. We looked at those standards, and part of our work is to look at what are the skills, right? What are the skills that the students need to know? What are the skills that the student needs to master? And so that teachers in campus have the flexibility for them to look at their curriculum, their lesson plans, and be able to literally scaffold and unfold the learning and make sure that exploration happens in the classroom. And so in doing so, I wanted to just kind of bring your attention to the slide. From top to bottom, what you see is the actual reading reporting categories, right? So one of our focuses for reading is reporting category 3, which has to do with understanding and an analysis of informational text. And so the lead forward tool that you see to the right of that, it's an actual online tool that's super useful. It is super cool because it allows teachers and administrators access to this library of standards, right? So these standards, they're able to go in and they're able to identify what are the student expectations. They're able to see, hey, what's the academic vocabulary that I need to teach to the students? What are the prerequisite skills that need to be taught prior to actually getting into that, right? So going back to the baseball analogy that I was giving you, in order for me to get the student to actually stand, be able to grip and swing, there's some things and some coaching that I have to do with the student. And so this helps the teachers, helps the administrators, and it provides them that level of detail, right? So if we're thinking about, well, when does this happen, right? And so campuses, teachers, and administrators have our professional learning communities, right? We now call them VPLCs, right? Our virtual PLCs. And so what happens is that during that time, they actually identify who are the students, right? What are the strengths of the students? What are the areas of opportunity that we talked about, right? And what are the skills that the students need to master? And in doing so, part of the work is being able to provide some targeted interventions so that we can get them to achieve the objective, right? Our goal was to get the student to swing and to hit the baseball. Then how do we get there, okay? And so that's part of the work that happens there. These documents also show other information like instructional activities, and they also provide examples on things like misconceptions, things that you should be aware of. Like if you're on the diamond and you're not paying attention, the ball could hit you in the face, right? And so we want to make sure that teachers are aware of that and that they are able to expect different things as they're teaching, reteaching the lesson itself. And so on the next slide, what you see there are your reading Spanish language arts standards, right? And so if you're asking yourself, well, why do we have Spanish language arts standards from grades 3 to 5? Because that's where our bilingual program is really focused on. And so those are the standards that the campus, that the teachers will be focusing on. And as we look backwards, these standards are going to be monitored every 3 weeks, right? They're going to be monitored and tracked so that, remember that first initial, the last step that we talked about the evaluation. So how are we going to evaluate and figure out where we're at, right? How are the scholars progressing through these standards? Then we're going to have these 3-week assessments that will be designed and will allow us to assess where the students are. Related to math, what you see in front of you are standards in grades 3 through 8. And then specifically, if I could note that we're going to be focusing on computation and algebraic relationships, geometry, and measurement with that. And the last piece that I did want to share is that that the campuses do have the flexibility to decide when are they going to be reteaching these, how are they going to be doing that, right? Right now, we are, some of the campuses based on their discretion are able to teach students either concurrently, face-to-face, and or remotely. And so based on that, they have a 3-week window when these standards will be assessed. And keep in mind, there's also new standards, right? Because we are in the middle of the year. Even though we lost some time with the whole winter storm, We're not making up that time, so to speak, but we do have a lot of skills that still need to be taught along the way to make sure that that student, right, that student athlete is able to not only hit the ball, is able to throw the ball, is able to catch the ball, right? We want to make sure that these skills can be applied in many different settings. And finally, I'm going to have my colleague, Kim. Kim is going to talk about specifically what type of support, what type of supervision have we provided to individual campuses as they're modifying their strategies.
Dr. Perez,
Mr. Perez, before,
go ahead, Justine.
Ladies first.
before you step away, so,
Yes, ma'am.
and this is, maybe a dumb question, but I need to ask it.
And no, ma'am.
So we have a lot of, standards listed based on the TEKS for each grade level and what's being taught. But to me, how is this not cookie cutter? And how are we adjusting this to meet the student where they are?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, right? So what you see in front of you is cookie cutter because the standards are the standards, right?
Mhm.
We have to teach those. So I
Correct.
completely agree with you with that. What's not cookie cutter is what happens when live teaching happens, right? When the synchronize is happening,
Mhm.
the actual collaboration between the teacher, the administrator, and the lesson plan design so that the time that they reteach this again is taught in a different way, right? And that's where we get away from the cookie cutter piece. And we use a tool like the Lead Forward so that we're able to then look at, okay, so we taught it this way. This is what I think the kids understood it, and this is why they got it wrong. And now we're going to do this differently. In addition to that, right, we have some resources, right, such as some mini lesson videos here that my colleague is going to show you guys some of the things that we have so that they can get additional support. And this is support for the teacher, right? Teaching is a craft, and as a craft, the only way to get better is to be a better content teacher. And so understanding what I need to teach, understanding how I need to teach it, and allowing for that flexibility and the empowerment to that teacher so that they can hopefully be more innovative. Bless you. They can be more innovative and creative as they're pulling in the kids. And one last thing I want to say is that we've got a lot of different resources, right? And so we also have digital content like, for example, ST Math, right? ST Math is one of the programs that we're currently in the process of utilizing. And so with this program, kids are able to then take an adaptive test and they're able to get that reinforced teaching from the teacher, but now they can do it at home and or they can do it within intervention, right? So if I'm a teacher and I have my kidney table, I can have students be working on specific skills. Then as I pull the kids, then I can work with little Johnny on certain things that they need to be learning.
So I know this question is a heavy lift. And how does that teacher have the resources they need to assess how each individual child learns best? So we're doing it in different ways, and I love we're having 3-week assessments. That gives us an opportunity to react faster. But if you know this child learns a certain way, why don't you teach it that way the first time? Then we don't need reteaching. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So how do you determine which method works best for which group of students, and then how do you implement that with fidelity so that they're getting it the first time around?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the goal, right?
Do they have the resources to do that? That's a big lift for one teacher, to try to assess. But if you know the child learns this way, then you teach it that way. Then you're not reteaching.
Yeah, and that's part of where the at-bat comes into play, right? And so there's like within a school year, there's a lot of standards, right? And so teachers are getting better every day. They get feedback, right, through the administrator does a walkthrough and has a coaching session with them. Now, is this potentially a plan, right, that is going to have no gaps or to be the best plan in the world. No, well, we're creating a culture of error, right? So that we can try different things, allow the teachers to try. And if they don't get it right because the student didn't learn it this way, then they have the opportunity to teach it in a different way. And then they have the flexibility for them to modify and adapt, right? And so that's the best part about the empowerment piece. The magic happens at the classroom teacher level. And so being able to be very intentional with the teachers, providing them support, and through the checking for understanding, the teacher should be able to then stop, adapt, and adjust his or her lesson at the time, so that as they're teaching, then we can focus on first time instruction so that they can get it right the first time.
Winford, I think you're next.
Okay, so I stepped out, so I might have just missed this. You have listed on here TEKS for each grade level. Looks like you listed 4 TEKS for each grade level, and I was wondering why were those TEKS the result of the BOY, or why are these particular TEKS on this sheet?
And that's a great question, right? So we have standards from MAP, okay? So I'm gonna kind of walk you through the process. So we have MAP standards, and then we have interim standards, right? And these are all the TEKS.
Are you saying MAP, M-A-P?
Yes, so MAP is the assessment that I said MAP standards, I'm sorry. MAP is the universal screener that the students took. Based on that, there's some.
I'm sorry, my understanding, or what I recall, was that we used the state administered sort of star light assessment instead of MAP this year. Do I have that wrong?
We did that for BOY.
Yes and no.
Okay. So what we're talking about is a different assessment we did. We're talking about MOY?
Yes and no. Okay. So this year, right? So we started from grades 3 through 8th grade. We started the school year taking an actual STAR assessment. Okay. So we took an online STAR, which is a benchmark release assessment.
Gotcha.
That's correct. So it was basically aligned to the STAR TEKS. Then in November, we actually took another online, which is known as Opportunity One, which is the online assessment. That online assessment is directly aligned to STAR. And so we pulled some standards from that assessment. And so that test is an entire STAR, and we're giving it to kids at a certain moment in time. And so we pulled standards from that one. And
when you say pulled standards, you mean after the children took that assessment, we looked at which TEKS they were deficient on. Okay, and so is that where these standards are coming from?
Yeah, so these are the high leverage, high level standards that as a district we're going to monitor, right? So we've got some supporting standards.
That's the answer to my question.
Got it. Okay, so we have some supporting standards. Thank you. Supporting standards and readiness standards that are high leverage, that are going to get the kids where they need to be, right? If taught correctly, right? If monitored, and making sure that the plans are actually implemented as they're designed.
Okay,
so
I'm clear. Thank you.
But so yes, so thank you. I think I didn't mention that, and so they are high leverage TEKS. So sorry about that.
Okay. Dr. Perez, I'd like to start with a joke, a teacher joke. We used to say that some teachers think reteaching is to say it again, only louder and slower. But they're still talking,
That's
a
right.
talking head. Okay. As I became more expert in teaching, and other people too, you never teach one concept once, and you don't do it the same way twice. I would teach auditory, visual, kinesthetic, and the same concept. And what I'm saying here, Justine, is what if you have an auditory learner? Don't you want them to pick up visual information? Don't you want them to be able to kinesthetically manipulate things and learn things from it? So I think it's really important that all kids get the different learning modalities. Dr. Watson, did you want to add to this?
I think Justine's question was great. I think to answer that, we would have the $1 million answer, because that's really what a master teacher is able to do. You know, with kids in the classroom with so many different levels of kids in the same grade level, they're trying to figure out where kids are to close those gaps and teach the content at the same time. And so I think your question was brilliant. That's what we're trying to do through PD and through training, is for teachers to be able to quickly learn kids' learning styles, as Dr. Jensen indicated, and to be able to teach them using those various modalities at the same time. But to what Dr. Perez was saying, they've got to first understand the content. Because if they don't get the content, there's no way they're going to be able to pull those various styles to teach it if they don't really understand. And this is what that Lead Forward document provides. One of the ways they provide support for them to do it.
Excellent.
That's why I preferenced my question with this, is I realize a heavy lift.
And it is, and you're right, and so that's part of the daily work that we engage to make sure that we do what's best for the kids every minute, every time we're with them, right? And so, absolutely.
When I had kids who really had problems, I said, I can teach this 10 different ways. Let's find a way that works for you. But that is when
That's
you've
a
got the ones who
master
are really
teacher.
having trouble with concept.
That's a master
Okay,
teacher.
but most of them, if I hit it 3 ways, I got almost everybody, if not everybody.
Mhm.
Are we hitting it 3 ways?
Well, I bet the master teachers are all the time. I bet they're having kids, at least what I've seen in spring schools, they're manipulating, they're listening, and they're watching. And that's just 3 modalities that I could hit.
Absolutely, and it depends on the class, the grade level, and so all those little factors that make a big difference in the end. So thank you for asking the question.
In a few short words, we're going to give our teachers what they need. We're going to give our teachers what they need. Every department has surrounded us with this work and with the support, and especially the support. And we're listening to our teachers. What works? What do they need? What do they want to hear? We're listening to our teachers. And let me show you a little bit about what we're talking about. Our C&I department has developed all kinds of resources to help us close these gaps, those gaps that we have identified through all of our testing, our campus-based testing, our formative assessments, and our district-wide testing. Let's begin by looking at some of the standard intervention resources that every school has available to them. Right now, starting next week, there's training available for all teachers in both math and literacy, intervention training. Our C&I department has developed lesson guides that support the lessons. Some of those were purchased. Others were developed right in-house with our curriculum specialists. For our Tier 2 and our Tier 3 learners, we have intervention teacher guides where teachers can log in to see how to teach those intervention lessons. There's the effective use of your intervention block with times, 15 minutes here, 10 minutes here, so that it kind of gives them a schedule, a path to be able to complete those assessments, complete those interventions. And lastly, how do you manipulate and be able to do small group instruction effectively? Then moving forward, the best way is to have many videos. Sometimes it's best if the teacher and the student can see the work in action. So our curriculum specialists have taught unit lessons and videotape them. So we have a video library where a teacher can log in and see anything that she needs to support them. It can be used in many different ways. Some of the video lessons can be delivered directly to a student so that the student can watch the curriculum specialist teaching the lesson. If there's a teacher that's struggling, she can watch a video as she pre-plans the lesson. In our PLC, our professional learning communities, we show the videos so teachers can say, let's talk about this. What are some of the guiding questions to help them in their pre-planning? They can be used in all these ways so that we can reach the student in many different modalities in many ways. So they see an expert person teaching that lesson. That helps them. We know videotaping is a best practice tool. This is a part that we want to be talking about, is the partnerships that we've done to put together to be able to teach the lessons. Our C&I department partnered with the Alley Theater to make primary lessons and videos that they do. The Alley Theater actually used their cast members to do and act out the videos to make them fun and engaging for our students, to make them where teachers can use them for planning. But more importantly, these lessons are going to be put in our parent portal, and a parent, especially our remote parents, can watch the video with their child, be able to help to support their child with the lessons. Not only do we have the Alley Theater videos, we also have what we call lit lessons. These lit lessons are taught and acted out with our own PVA students. So they're doing literature lessons where parents can watch them in a fun, engaging way. Some of them are simple enough that you can put on for a second grade student and a student can watch the lesson. As you said, audio, all different ways. How do you learn the lesson? Some students learn better this way. So providing these opportunities and ways that students can learn are what we're doing here.
I'm
This is-
sorry, I have to interrupt because this is wonderful. I want to hear a little bit more about how you came up with the idea, how you got the people together, how you made this happen.
Collaboration. It wasn't me. So when you say me, it's collaboration. But this is what I'm talking about with every single department taking ownership for it. Our PVA department collaborates with our CNI department. Some people doing the instructional piece, bringing students in doing the acting piece. It helps both the scholar and it helps both the teacher. It makes it engaging. It helps the remote learner and it helps the face-to-face. But more importantly, it provides the services and the resources so that a teacher does not have to create everything. It's here for them. I think you'll like this next section even better. This piece is around our STAR review units. We're getting ready to start STAR camps, so schools will begin to develop their own STAR camps. On March 12th, all of these assistant SUPs and the colleagues that I have here are bringing our principals together, because if we start with the principal and get the principal engaged and get the principal understanding it, then we can move forward. So the principals are meeting to talk about these STAR review camps. The camps are themed. They're 3-week camps, and they're presented 3 weeks before each assessment is given. The camps have exit tickets. They have the protocols. They have the lessons there, the mini lessons. They have the assessments, all built out for the schools. So what I want to say to you is what our charge is to provide for the teacher. So we work the teacher through our POCs. We have the resources here, multilingual, special ed. Everyone is a part of providing the resources so teachers can just get in there and teach. I'm going to continue with that work and I want to move forward.
Can I ask, how have we rolled this out and implemented it, and how successful are the teachers being with in digesting?
So let me tell you this. One thing we have to do is be ready to pivot. We've rolled it out through teacher lessons, and our workforce development is also doing professional development, and we've made it available to all teachers. But in any situation, some teachers come, some teachers don't
So
come.
we haven't made it mandatory.
So what happens is they're doing it in the evenings, they're doing it on Saturdays. So then we pivot. We're having it also done with our administrators teams, our leadership teams, so that now we're making sure, because in our professional learning communities, we're doing it right in school. So that way you get the teacher excited, the teacher's there. So if you don't even come on a Saturday to one of the training, we're doing it during the day. So we're making it available over and over again. It is recorded.
Okay.
So some teachers say, I can't come, but I will watch it. And it can be done that way. So many, many ways to be able to get the learning. The bottom line is we have to all be able to understand it and embrace it to do a good job at it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to bring up our next colleague.
Hey, we're going to talk about reading and math. And actually, beginning with the end in mind, you've heard a lot of the strategies that we're working towards. And so I'm going to talk about the how, because you've heard the what and the why from Dr. Perez and Ms. Fontenot. Here you'll see 5 steps that we've taken to help align all of the actions that have been shared with you thus far this evening. From the supports that you saw previously mentioned, our expectations are through creating the district-wide assessments every 3 weeks, which will be able to monitor the student's progress in a timely manner. And using this system will allow us to immediately pull reports that will show us mastery and improvement needed of our targeted TEKS focus. With the identification of the targeted TEKS, We have structured support, as you've heard, and targeted professional development that will support our teachers to give us ways to be able to meet the students where they are and provide all the necessary support. Here you'll see that as assistant superintendents, we have supervisory expectations for our principals as we work with our campuses to monitor their data and to plan for continuous improvement. This is inclusive of all departments across our district as we align for the execution of laser targeted focused, hyper-focused action plans. As we continue to work with our campus leaders in central office, you'll see that we've designed a common expectation plan that will allow us to monitor the improvement of our scholars in a very, very strategic way. As you saw in the previous slides, those supports will lay the foundation for additional student success that we'll be able to achieve with our students. I'm going to share with you what the roadmap looks like and how it will highlight actions that bring all of us into this work, our campus leaders, our teachers, our students, and our parents. Everyone has a part in us ensuring student success and that we're mutually accountable for improved student outcomes. Here you'll see 9 areas of support that we're providing through the creation of these action plans. You'll see that from our leader of schools, we've been working diligently to be supportive of the academic gaps that we see present. As Dr. Perez called them, our opportunity gaps that we're working to close. This approach that we're using with the creation of our action plans will make sure that we have extreme clarity around knowing where our students are and where we're going. Based on the focused support, any additional needed resources and supports through materials, reteach, professional development, and assessment has already been provided and in the works through our curriculum and instruction team and our workforce and development team. This will allow our campus administration teams to actually look at the execution of these plans. They'll be able to go into the classroom and observe the lessons, observe the intervention structures, to coach immediately on the spot, and to do labs to see if students are getting it, work with those teachers to be able to help support them in the moment so that our students do not demonstrate continued gaps. They'll also be able to actively participate in the PLCs to support the execution of the action plans, reviewing student work products, looking at exit tickets and do nows, which will give them immediate feedback, not even having to wait until we get to the 3-week assessment. This will continue to help us to be able to have a rapid response. We know that time is of the essence, and we have to capitalize on all of the areas that we can support our students. Next, you'll see some of our teacher actions. And each layer, starting with us as the superintendents and working with our leaders of schools, our principals and our associate principals and assistant principals, and then supporting all the way down to the teacher level, you see 9 steps as well. Here, our teachers are involved and expected to take ownership while collaborating with their grade level teams, their PLCs, to provide prescriptive support for improvement. You will note that this involves intentional outreach for our remote and our in-person learners. Teachers are using their lessons and their resources to communicate through the expectation of working to address all of our students and all of our sub-pops for targeted focus. And then lastly, you see the students and our parents, why we're all here, or our children. Our students and the parents are the reason that we're here, and we know that we are the answer. Through our goal setting and drilling down to each individual student's needs, we can benchmark their progress to check to see if they're on track as we engage their parents to support their child. Working together, we are extremely confident that we will make progress while we support our learners with the high yield TEAP and support. This helps to see that we have a role and a responsibility for everyone involved at our schools supporting our children and being immediate to the needs and pivoting as we need to in order to support closing those opportunity gaps. We thank you for allowing us to share our response tonight. We anticipate seeing the results of the efforts and being able to come and demonstrate that progress that's happening in our schools. Thank you. Any additional questions, comments?
Yes, I've heard of high yield strategies with Marzano, but I had never heard of a high yield teak.
Peaks? Mhm.
And I just wondered, could you describe one more time how I know that you're getting this out of assessment data, but how did you pick the ones that you think you really are going to see growth in that teak? How did you identify that?
Based on the times that it's showing up for the test and the amount of questions that are present, if we're attacking those particular strategies and those teaks, it's going to allow our students more opportunities to demonstrate that progress, as well as seeing that it's an area from across looking at the data that is a struggle across the district. Even if any of our kids have high mobility and they're moving in between areas, we know that this is areas that we can support them in as well. So it's based on the reporting category of the amount of times that you see that question or that type of question tested on the exam. You're welcome. Thank you, Dr. Jensen. Okay, thank you so much.
So did we have 3 week, I'm sorry, am I next? Okay, so we have the every 3 weeks, and then there's an analysis of the reports. So who has access to those reports?
Our research and accountability team has access. We will have access as assistant superintendents. Our principal leaders will have access, and our teachers will have access. That they'll work with the students and the parents to share as well.
The teachers will have it, so they don't necessarily have to wait for the 3 weeks. They can monitor it all along.
They won't be able to monitor the assessments all along, but based on what we shared about the do nows, the exit tickets, those are daily that we'll be able to track. But the assessment itself, which will be 12 to 15 questions, we'll see that at the 3 week mark after we've gone through the cycle and the blueprint of all the teaks that are tested. But daily, we'll be able to see what's tested that day, what's assessed through the do now and the exit tickets for us to understand their progress, and we can still communicate with teachers and parents about how we can pivot the next day, the day after, to adjust that instruction.
Yeah, the solution is typically in the data.
Absolutely.
And so if everyone has access to the data, then that's
and we're communicating and reviewing it timely.
I hear you say you're giving to teachers and parents. How are you relating this information to the parents? And for one, I as a parent, if you're relating something to me and I get it, and let's say you say my child has mastered this 70%, and you consider that as a passing and want to move him on to the next level. Well, I don't. I want him to learn 100%. So is any intervention given to me, the parent, such that I can continue to work with the child if you're moving on to the next level? What type of measurements are given to the parents?
So we have in some of the resources that, let me see if I can just go back to some of the areas that Ms. Fontenot had shared. There is built-in areas of enrichment. And so you'll see that second bullet has the enrichment areas. And so that's made available to parents. We're using the s'mores, we're using the call outs, the parent forums for our schools, and Schoology and Hack to be able to communicate and upload additional resources that will support.
And we also want you to know that while we're identifying students for small group instruction, because we're intervening, we've also identified students who master skills at the MOY. So those students would be doing some differentiation work, some differentiated work. So they may be working in small group on a project-based learning. They may be working on a research-based learning, some of those kinds of skills, because they've mastered these skills. And so to have them keep doing that would be holding them back. So those identifications have to go for intervention as well as enrichment.
The plan, I think, is fantastic. I also really appreciate the materials you all have assembled for teacher use. When I was teaching, I used to use the standard deviance. Anybody ever hear them? My concern is the implementation with fidelity concern. especially given sort of the current challenges we're all facing. I think under not even ideal circumstances, you could probably do this on autopilot. My concern is how we're addressing the challenges we have in terms of the bearing of our teachers, our students, our parents. Like we're asking everybody to do their part here. Some people are better able to do that than others, obviously. And so, like, just the thing I worry about is, from a workforce development standpoint, when I hear that we're making professional development an option for teachers and not mandating it, that makes me a little bit nervous. So I just want to put that out there for your commiseration.
No, thank you, Trustee Adams. And what we're trying to do is pay attention to all of those needs that you've mentioned and really provide supports wherever we can. So as Ms. Fontenelle had mentioned around the PD, and sometimes, people don't come as much as you strongly encourage, or even sometimes it's a part of their goal and they're expected to come and attend it. But we know that some of those areas that they have challenges and support, they're not able to right now. So we're providing the videos. We're providing, even in the asynchronous day, when they have the hour of teacher time that we can direct, that we're pulling them in. So every single opportunity that we can do it, when we have them live in front of us, we're making sure that we provide those needs there as well, and in their PLCs.
I think the only other thing to address that is, so we're providing a lot of opportunities, but we've kind of switched. You can keep trying to get people to come and some come and some don't. We're focusing on the outcome. And so whether you come or not, you're responsible for the outcome. And if you don't get the outcome, then sometimes that's the impetus for you to get training, because we've identified that there's a need that you don't have and that we're trying to provide it for you, and you're hurting kids because you're not showing up. And so we're focusing on that outcome as a means to get them to go ahead and to come.
Okay, that's good. And this is really exciting, and it looks like a solution. As I sit here in year 15 on the board, we're still struggling to get our kids where we need to get them. And it's getting frustrating, especially when we're trying to get there in the midst of a pandemic, and we've had challenges even with testing the last few years. I mean, we had the hurricane and then the pandemic, and it's been a difficult process. So to have pulled all this together in spite of all the challenges that we have, this is actually great work. I'm really excited. And the 15 years is probably the cleanest and clearest that I've seen to support intervention.
It has been a meeting
Because I
of the
think
mind.
that's been where we miss it,
Yes.
is we're not getting in there and intervening enough to get the child where they need to meet them where they are and get them where they need to be. So that's what I
Through
see.
the collaboration of the departments, the campuses, the principals, the teachers, parents, literally everyone,
Mhm.
this is what you're seeing. And so with having those voices, those perspectives, and the opportunity to meet those needs, we're excited about the opportunities that we have here.
And I too still struggle with optional training. So I just want to voice that. And I realize we're focusing on the outcome, but if we focus on the outcome, we're at the end of the process and it's too late for that child.
Thank you.
We're doing that every 3 weeks.
Every 3 weeks.
Okay, then it's not too late.
So, to be perfectly honest, Ms. Durant, I am really curious as to how we are going to end this year
Yeah.
with measurement, with the scores. I'm gonna put it out there. If we're doing this and teachers are really doing their part and following this plan, our scores should be up. But so
It's a winning plan.
the plan is a good plan, and the implementation we're concerned about. But definitely, the teachers need to understand that we expect higher scores
Mhm.
this year. The teachers need to understand that. And I support my teachers and will push for them to give them whatever they need to be successful. So if the plan is here, they can review it, they can look at videos, they can go back and work with professional development with Ms. Fontenot and Dr. Carter and all of them. We are expecting teachers to do their part in helping our students to be successful, even in this pandemic.
And in this plan, we've talked about administration and our principals and our teachers and our parents and the roles that they play. But I sit here and I ask myself, what role do I play? Does this body play
Yeah.
in this process? And where's our page? And we may want to think about that.
We did, and it's so funny that you said that. And we were having a meeting with the assistant soups, and I said, "You all know our board.
I want our
You're going to
slide.
ask, what is our role in it?" Absolutely.
Exactly. We want to know our role because we want to
We're on the
play
team.
our role. We're on the hot seat too.
I think more than anything, this is the type of conversation that this team has, and we're going even deeper in those conversations. I particularly like the final comment that Ms. Newhouse indicated, because it's not placing blame and it's not creating an us and them, but it's setting the expectation. And we need to make sure that everyone understands the expectation is that we're here to support the teachers, train the teachers, give them what they need to be successful. But the teachers are the ones that's teaching the kids, and that we have an expectation that kids learn as a result of it. And so I do enjoy this conversation, and we'll continue supporting and giving all that we can to the teachers so they can do it. But we do have an expectation that kids learn in this district, and that they get something out of the instruction they get from their teachers every day.
It's of a piece with the Lone Star governance training we've been doing, where we talk about student outcomes improving when adult behaviors change. And the first adult behavior that has to change around here is my adult behavior. And we all take that on that responsibility.
Thank you, Winfred. As I said, we're on the hot seat. We look at ourselves and we're evaluating ourselves. What is it we're not doing to help our teachers be successful and our students be successful? So thank you. With that being said, Ms. Westbrooks, I think you're next on the agenda, and we're going to be talking about our budget.
Yes, ma'am.
So
Thank
our
you.
budget may play a part in this as well.
It definitely does. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, President Newhouse. And as President Newhouse said, we are starting the discussion of the development of the 2021-2022 budget. And so with every budget process, the budget process is guided by the Board of Trustees priorities. And so if you all recall, in October, our board met in collaboration with the cabinet team and developed the board's 6 priorities that you can see here, which are outcomes, equity, opportunities, leadership, well-being, and engagement, with equity being the foundational priority. And so we're keeping equity at the forefront of everything that we do and making sure that we're putting resources in place to ensure that we're giving all of our students in Spring ISD, every child, the opportunity to have success both in school and in life. And so as we go through the budget process, these 6 priorities, again with equity being the foundation, will be at the forefront, top of mind of decisions as we allocate resources for this upcoming year. There's one item under outcomes that I wanted to bring to your attention, and it's number 6. That was not a part of the original outcomes and charge that we were giving as part of these priorities, but the discussion that you were having just before we began this, and the discussion about interventions, and the fact that we know our students have instructional gaps and they have learning loss that will have to be addressed. We wanted to ask if the board wanted to add a number 6 under outcomes that was specifically geared towards creating a strategic plan to intervene and address those learning losses that we know our students have had as a result of the closures and just the disruption to life in general for our students as related to the pandemic.
So I happened to catch Mike Morath during the last committee hearing. And it was something that I took note of, that he talked about how over the course of this pandemic, across Texas, there was 3.2 months of learning loss that occurred between, and there's always some learning loss that happens every summer, but I think if the Commissioner of Education is talking about this, then we definitely need to be talking about it.
I agree.
I think we all have been saying the same thing. We realize and we know that our students are behind.
Okay, then we'll add that to the list as number 6 under outcomes for the board's priorities, and we'll begin making plans to address those learning losses. Additional
Ms. Westbrook,
plans.
how did you say it was 6 weeks? How long did you say they are projecting the learning loss was?
3.2 months.
That's more,
Yes.
yeah. I thought you said weeks. I'm like, it's longer than that. Okay.
Months.
March all the way through the summer.
Okay, so every budget year always begins with some crystal ball moments where we're trying to estimate what things are going to look like in the future. However, in most years, we're able to get to those estimates and those assumptions pretty easily by looking at historical data. And so we get a comfortable level of confidence in our estimates and our assumptions. But this year, history is not helping us very much because that's not an indication of necessarily what's yet to come. So this budget year is extremely challenging, and estimating revenue is extremely challenging for all of the reasons that are listed here. And so enrollment is at the top of this list. So will our students return? That's the number one question. Is we know that we have been consistently between 1,600 and 2,000 students below the number of students that we projected to have in the district in 2021. And of those students that are missing, the majority of them are at the elementary level, and we see them in our primary grades, pre-K, kindergarten, some in first grade, but mostly highly concentrated in pre-K and kindergarten. And so that's a big question, is will our students return? What grade will they be in when they return to us? So that's one of the first things that's giving us a bit of a challenge as we're starting this budget process. The next is property values. And so the impact that what's happening in the economy is having on our property values is still yet to be seen for this upcoming year. Also, the winter storm that we just had an impact on properties across our region and across the state. Now, we do know that our property values are based upon the value on January 1st. So the winter storm may not have much of an impact on the actual values, but it could definitely have an impact on our collections and how many people will seek to have some concessions based on damage that occurred since the value was placed on their homes. So needing some additional clarity on what our property values are going to look like, but we know that's forthcoming. Remote attendance. So for 2021, we were able to receive full funding for our students that attend remotely with us, the same funding as if our students were attending in person. Now, this is a legislative decision as to whether or not we'll continue to receive funding for our students that attend remotely. The commissioner has said that it's his recommendation that we do, and we're feeling pretty confident going forward that we will have that ability for the next school year. It's not guaranteed, and there's some information that came out today that gives us a little bit of pause about what that's going to look like for next year. The other item is PPE. So we know we have 3 vaccines available now. COVID cases are starting to have decreased quite a bit over a while, but that decrease is starting to flatten out. And so we're not exactly sure which direction we're going in, but it's highly likely that we're going to continue to have lots of the same costs that we had this year for personal protective equipment, for disinfecting of our facilities. All of those costs are projected to continue. How much? Not exactly sure. We've got some replenishment levels that we've gotten comfortable with, but that's a cost that will continue and is still a bit of a question mark. As far as the hold harmless goes, we'll talk about that because we received some new information today around 3:30. So we'll talk about the impact of the hold harmless provision on the 2021 school year, but we're not exactly sure if we're going to have any hold harmless provisions going forward into the next school year. So that's still a bit of a question mark as well. One thing that I do want to make sure that we highlight at this point in time is that based on what we're seeing with some of the initial revenue estimates and everything is still coming into focus, is that we are projecting to have a budget deficit for this upcoming budget year based on the information that we have at this moment in time. So we're not looking at numbers per se tonight, but I do want to make sure that I say that so that when we do start looking at numbers, you're coming in with that thought process of the fact that we're looking at a projected budget deficit. So though it's challenging, we must move forward. We still have to create a budget and be prepared to pass that budget later on in this spring semester. So two of our biggest assumptions that we have to make start with number one, our state revenue makes up about 55% of the total revenue that we bring into the district. And that revenue is based upon the number of students we have in the district and how often those students come to school. So enrollment is one of the first things that we have to estimate. For the 2021-22 school year, we're projecting our enrollment to be at 33,240. And so that's based on what we know now. That is over 2,000 students less than what we had projected for this current year, the 2021 school year. And it's over 300 students less than where we were at the October snapshot. So our research and accountability team, they work some with our outside demographers, Templeton Demographics, but largely the work is done in-house with our research and accountability team. So they look at our October 2020 snapshot. Where were our campuses? Where were our special populations? They look at all of that data and start building the projections for the next year. And that's our normal process that we go through. Then in January, after the holidays, because people tend to move over the holidays, or they may move into the district or move out of the district over the holidays. So when we get into January, we have a bit more of a clear picture of what our enrollment looks like. So then we look again at all of our numbers and adjust accordingly if we see a need to make adjustments. So based upon that October data and that January data, the projected enrollment is created. Then that enrollment is sent out to our campus principals, and they have some time to go through, review it, look at what's happening on their campus and in their neighborhoods and surrounding areas. And if they have concerns, there's an apartment complex that's opening up right next door to us. We think we're going to get some kids. So they'll have that discussion with Dr. Cobb, or pretty much anything else that we see that's happening in our area. They'll have those discussions. And so Dr. Cobb takes that information under advisement, and sometimes adjustments are made, and sometimes we don't think that the impact is large enough to make an adjustment to the enrollment. So that's the process that we go through for the projected enrollment. So talk about a crystal ball next year, we still don't know. Everything that you hear that's happening across the nation, that's happening in our state, has an impact on our parents' thought process as they're deciding what they're going to do with their students for the next year. So this is one of those where we're making our best estimates based on the information that we have, and then we'll have to adjust once things actually come to fruition, once we see what actually happens. So that's where we are with our enrollment. The next largest revenue source is local revenue, and that's based upon our property values. And so we're starting the budget process with an assumption that our property values will grow by 5%. And so that, again, is based upon historical data. So last year, the district's property values increased by close to 8%. And the year before that, we increased by close to 6%. So Spring ISD's property value growth has consistently over the last several years outpaced the state and has outpaced Harris County as well. So will that continue? We're not exactly sure, but assuming the 5% growth for now gives us a starting point. And then of course, when we receive our estimated property values, we'll make adjustments as necessary. The state of Texas is estimating a value growth of 1.84%. And so last year, just to put that into perspective, the state growth rate was about 6.22%. So they're anticipating their values will grow a lot less over this next year. I know we all recall the last legislative session when there were sweeping changes that were made. And one of those changes was the tax rate compression. And so if property values grow by more than 2.5%, then locally districts have to compress our tax rate, and that savings goes to our taxpayers locally. But then the difference in the total revenue is funded by the state. So that's a part of House Bill 3. So with the assumption that we'll have a 5% growth in our values, that would require us to further compress our tax rate. And so with the 5% growth, we would be looking at a tax rate of 0.9132 compared to where we are now, which is a 0.9343. But of course, all of that is very preliminary, and it depends on what actually happens with our values as to what our rates will look like. But this gives us a starting point. We can start developing numbers, developing revenue projections that we can adjust in future iterations once we have actual data.
Ms. Westbrooks?
Yes, ma'am.
I had a question of you. During a session yesterday in governance camp, people who work very closely with the legislature said that the state of Texas is hurting for money, and we're going to have a budget shortfall there. And that apparently some people are looking at that compression and thinking, oh, that's money the state of Texas could get. If the school districts had it, then, they could pay the school district less, that kind of thing. Are you hearing that anybody might change the compression rate? You haven't heard that?
No, ma'am, we have not heard that. And in fact, they've said that they're committed at the legislative session to continuing all of the funding formulas that are related to House Bill 3, which is inclusive of that tax compression. Okay, so we looked at our top 2 revenue sources. So now we look at our top expenditure, which is staffing. And so staffing makes up about 87% of the district's budget. And now that we have our enrollment projections, they've been reviewed, we've begun creating our staffing for the next year, or estimating our staffing for the next year. And as you know, in 2021, we held on to all of our staffing based upon the projected enrollment. So as we talked at our December board meeting, we are overstaffed based on our enrollment compared to our staffing. So as part of this budget process, we're adjusting our staffing to the student enrollments that we have using our current staffing guidelines. And so as a reminder, for pre-K through 4th grade, we staff our classrooms at 22:1. For 5th grade, we're at 25:1. Middle school's 28:1, and high schools are at 33:1. With high schools, even though we're at 33:1, that's their base staffing, but they receive additional positions on top. So for example, each high school receives 24 career and technical teachers, CTE teachers. They receive 10 at-risk teachers, and then of course their PVA staffing, their JROTC staffing, all of those are on top of, in addition to the 33:1 staffing that we do at the high school level. So to talk a little bit about our approach to staffing right now, when we're in a budget deficit year, we're looking at each classroom. So with elementaries, when we say that we anticipate that an elementary is going to have 600 students, we're looking at each grade level. And then we're staffing it based on the current staffing guidelines and making decisions as we go along. And so it's very important to note here, this is one of those equity opportunities where we keep equity top of mind. And we know that some of our campuses have different demographics, have different challenges, and we make some staffing decisions based upon those unique needs that we know our campuses have. And so an example of that are our iZone campuses. We know that those campuses, we're doing some transformational changes at those campuses. And so the staffing decisions we make there, when we're looking at the current staffing guidelines, could be slightly different than at another campus. But what we are doing is we're holding on adding any staff where possible. And so I'll give you an example of that. So if we're looking at a grade level and say that it's a kindergarten grade level, and you've got 22 in one class, 22 in another class, and 23 in a third class. Well, with 23 students in that one, projected to be in that one classroom, we would hold in that circumstance, and we would hold that class at 23, which means we wouldn't add an additional teacher that would bring class sizes then down to 15 or 16. We would hold. And so when the year begins, that classroom could be at 23 or it could be at 20 once we actually get into the school year. If they are at 23 or they're at 24, then we're going to level that class out during the leveling process, which means once we see the actual enrollment happen, that's when we'll level. And what often happens is that classroom may be over, but we've got another that's under. And so we level and we end up moving the teachers around based on the actual enrollment. The other approach to staffing is, and we've talked about this before, is scrutinizing vacancies. Do we need to fill a position? If not, if we can hold, we hold. And the next topic is very important to note, is that as we're adjusting our staffing, then we're looking at closing positions, but we're closing via attrition. So typically each year we have a turnover of about 400 teachers across the district. And so what tends to happen is when a position becomes vacant, we can close a position. So then any teacher that is wanting to be with Spring for the next year is able to stay with Spring. And we're making the staffing adjustments through attrition by closing vacancies and adjusting through that process. We are starting our budget staffing meetings with our campuses beginning next Wednesday. And so that is when the campuses have all received their budget templates, which shows them exactly what their staffing is projected to be for next year based on the staffing guidelines and some of the adjustments that we spoke about. And we'll sit down virtually with the human resources team, the finance team, the school leadership team, and the principal, and we will walk through their staffing one by one and have discussions. We talk about those needs. We make some educated assumptions about their needs at their campuses and get very important input from our assistant superintendents. And then now with the principal in the room, we make those final decisions so that they know what next year's staffing is looking like at their campus. So that's the process and the approach that we're going through right now to adjust our staffing and trying to get out in front of it as early as possible, but also knowing that we have to be nimble because as more information becomes available, we will adjust as necessary and as appropriate. Okay, so we know we're in a legislative year and Austin is buzzing right now. What we've heard thus far, to Dr. Jensen's point earlier about what she had heard about tax compression, one thing that we have heard consistently, both the House and the Senate, though they are looking at a revenue shortfall of about $7 billion, both have committed to maintaining those funding formulas that were created as a part of House Bill 3. And we know House Bill 3 had several new pots of money. So there's the college and career military readiness, the new dyslexia allotment, the Senate Bill 11 safety and security allotment, all of those funding formulas, and the extended state comp ed funding, which is for our at-risk populations. All of those were a part of House Bill 3, and that's what they're committed to continuing to fund at the level that they were set out in the last legislative session. There are additional funds that are available at the state level through what's called ESSER 2, which is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Funds. The ESSER 1 was used by the state to supplant and ensure that school districts didn't lose any funding in 2019-20. So we were truly, truly made whole in 2019-20, but we didn't receive any additional funding. It was just the funding allocation that we were already allocated for 19-20. With the ESSER 2 funds, we are still not clear on exactly how the state is going to use those funds. It's highly likely that they are going to use a portion of those funds to again supplant the 2021-22 budget to ensure that the state's budget is whole. So that means whatever we would be allocated for our student population, we would be paid, but it may be split between federal funds and state funds. But we also anticipate that there will be some new money that will be provided to school districts as a part of this funding source as well. What we anticipate is that that new money will be, of course, one-time money, and that would be the funds that we would be able to address those learning losses that we talked about earlier, because we know we're going to need additional materials, provide additional support to our teachers as they try to get multiple years of learning growth from our students, and possibly more time, whether that's through summer school, through high dosage tutorials, those sorts of things. But we do know that there's funds here and it's available. We just do not know how those funds are going to be allocated to the school districts and what strings may come attached to those dollars. So more to come with that. Or the timing, yes. And what we have been cautioned is that we anticipate receiving that information very late in the budget process. So we'll start our planning and prioritize our planning. And then whenever we receive the information, we have to adjust at that point in time, which isn't too far off from any legislative year, because it could be, you know, the last legislative session, we were getting information literally up to the minute. But in this case, it'll be that plus more.
So I just want to reiterate something that Ann said. So we're going to go ahead and plan and start making preparations for any additional funding we may have to address the strategic plan and learning loss in particular. So when the money comes, we're not saying, what do we want to do? And so we'll come back and share that plan with you throughout the budget process, so we all are on the same page.
So we talked earlier about PPE and continued costs for sanitation and things of those nature. So it's possible that we may receive some additional funding at some point to help with those costs as well. Hold harmless. So we've talked quite a bit about hold harmless over the last several months, and thank you all very much for your support and the letters that were written to Austin, and the message got out, the message got there for certain. So today around 3 o'clock, we started receiving lots of information about the hold harmless being extended to the second half of the semester. Yes, so that's good news. It is definitely good news. So what we know about the hold harmless provision is the first 2 6 weeks is very simple. It's automatic. If the average daily attendance, the actual average daily attendance is less than the hold harmless calculated average daily attendance, which is based on trend data from 2017, 2018, and 2019, then it's just replaced. So that means we will not be funded any less than the floor amount that was calculated for the hold harmless provision. And it's an all or none. So if our ADA is lower, then we have to use all of the components of the hold harmless. And what that means is, say for example, our special education numbers. So our special education actual numbers could be higher than the hold harmless calculation, but it wouldn't matter because if our ADA is less, then we use all of the hold harmless numbers. Does that make sense? So it's truly all or none. So first 2 6 weeks, it's automatic. For the third 6 weeks, it's the same methodology where it's actual versus the projection. And so we're good in spring because so long as we offered on-campus instruction to any student that wanted it throughout the third 6 weeks, then we'll automatically receive our hold harmless funding for the third 6 weeks as well. So starting with the 4th through the 6th 6 weeks, that's where today's announcement comes out. And I will tell you, we received it at 3 o'clock, read through it feverishly, had some conversations. So this is based on our understanding as of, I don't have a clock, but as of this minute of the hold harmless. So what it says is that the average on-campus attendance participation rates during the 6th 6 weeks has to be 80% or higher, or it has to be at least equal to or above our on-campus instruction on the snapshot date in October. So we're not going to be at 80% on-campus instruction. We don't anticipate that. For us, we would be looking at that October or above. So when we submitted our fall PEANS data in October, our percentage of on-campus instruction, students receiving instruction on campus, was 49%. So that means our 6th 6 weeks, we have to have 49% or more of our students receiving instruction on campus in order to qualify for the hold harmless provision for the 4th, 5th, and 6th 6 weeks. So what does that mean? That means we're going to have to monitor, reach out to our families, ensure that our students do not disconnect with us between now and the end of the 6 6 weeks. And we won't know exactly what happens until the 6 6 weeks is over. So that's the provision. So earlier when I mentioned the remote attendance and what we think is going to happen going forward, it's clear that, and the governor even stated it in his letter, that the goal is to get all the students back on campus. And so the way the hold harmless provision is written, it's to encourage us to get our students back on campus. So that's what we know at this point about the hold harmless.
So they're saying basically, as long as your on-campus attendance hasn't gone down, then you will qualify for the hold on.
Exactly.
All right.
Remember, that's a way of for districts to not say, okay, we're going to be held harmless. You all can all go back to remote to keep them coming. But at the same time, from equity standpoint, we want to make sure that we're not going to be penalized as well. As we are looking at our population and our families, we do know across the region 4 in particular, that school districts that have more economically disadvantaged families and that are serving more African American and Hispanic students, their in-person percentages or face-to-face percentages are lower. And so we're monitoring, and as Ms. Westbrook says, we're studying the hold harmless, and if there's any changes or anything that we see, we'll definitely bring that back up to you.
When is the 6 weeks?
The last from, I don't know the exact dates, but it'll take us through the end of the school year. So I think the last day of school is June 7th.
Okay. I've got concerns about what's going to happen after spring break.
June 4th, thank you.
June 4th. Yeah, I just got a little concerned about what's going to happen after spring break. I think we're going to see spikes.
Okay, and so one other point to note with hold harmless, because we hear the term fully fund, for spring, it's not 100% based on where we anticipated we would have been for this year. So our trended down. So our hold harmless is about 98.3% of funding. So it helps, it certainly helps, and it decreases the amount of revenue loss that we would have, but it's not 100%. So I just want to make sure to say that, but it is certainly a good thing. Okay, and then the last item on this slide is the disaster pennies. So if you recall, a few years ago, seems like a really, really long time ago now, after Hurricane Harvey, we were able to take advantage of a clause in the Texas tax code. It was chapter 26.08 that allowed us to increase and levy and take advantage of the additional state revenue as well with golden pennies. And with that, it gave some one-time funds that were able to flow into the district. And so the discussion now is whether or not the COVID-19 pandemic actually qualifies under this disaster provision, and that's yet to be seen. So the provision speaks, it says, when increased expenditure of money by a school district is necessary to respond to a disaster, including a tornado, hurricane, flood, wildfire, or other calamity, but not including a drought that has impacted the school district, that's when the disaster provision kicks in. So now we have to wait for our legislators to tell us if COVID-19, if this pandemic is the right type of calamity. So we've heard one of our legislators that was quoted as saying that they would liken the pandemic to a drought, and therefore we wouldn't be eligible to take advantage of that. So yes. So we will continue to pay attention to the narrative on that. And if the opportunity arises where we could take advantage of those disaster pennies, then we will bring that forward to the board for consideration.
Well, shame on that legislator.
Okay. And so the last information here is just some upcoming dates. As I mentioned earlier, the campus budget staffing meetings are beginning March 10th next week. The principals are hard at work already looking through those, and they'll go through March 26th. We'll receive our property value estimates on or before April 30th, and it's usually on April 30th or a day or so before. The regular legislative session is scheduled to end on May 31st. And then, of course, as of now, we're scheduled to have our budget officially adopted at the June 22nd board meeting. So as always, when we're in a legislative year, when we're dealing with the pandemic, all the information is preliminary and it's based on what we know as of now, and we'll certainly update you and adjust our plans accordingly. But we will definitely be bringing numbers to you soon to start making some decisions and continue our planning process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Westbrooks. You've given us quite a bit here to open our eyes and get ready for. And some of this, as Dr. Jensen mentioned earlier, is being discussed in our governance conference that was going on now that we're listening to. Go ahead.
A couple of days ago in the Chronicle, someone wrote an op-ed piece where they said that they think that people should know that there's a trauma tax in Texas. And I could say that for the last few years. Oh my gosh, what has happened one time after another. As a biology teacher, I always warned, this was 1980s, and I said, world pandemics are what really take out species. And, I just hope that we're all smart enough to keep handling this well and controlling what we can control. I can tell you that in the past, one year when we had a freeze, we had burst pipes in our house. And it's just, even though it was our porch and our kitchen, when I walked into that kitchen and I thought to myself, I'm not going to have a kitchen for 6 months. And I was just about on the nose, how it took to go through the insurance and all the stuff. And, our families are going through this. And some of us in this room are going through this. And I just feel like resilience is an important human quality. So my heart goes out to everybody who's going through challenges.
Thank you. For our next item, I'd like to recognize our Executive Chief of District Operations, Mark Miranda.
Thank you, President Newhouse, Dr. Watson, and members of the board. We will be on page 19 of your agenda packet. This is Spring ISD's request for annexation into Harris County Water Control and Improvement District 99. Need to give you a little bit of background. So currently, Spring High School, Spring 9th Grade Center, and McNabb Elementary School are served for water and wastewater treatment through Harris County Water Control and Improvement District 99. There is no current agreement in place between WCID 99 and Spring ISD. Service for those locations has been provided by the Water Control District through consent for years, as long as any of us could remember. So WCID 99 has capital improvements that are an ongoing part of what they have to do to maintain the water and wastewater services to us. And Spring ISD is responsible for using 33 to 35% of the Water Control District's capacity. So we use quite a bit of their capacity. Rightfully and proportionately, they have asked us to contribute, Spring ISD to contribute to those capital needs that they have. And that's something that is generally passed on to customers of the water control districts or the MUD districts. In response to that, we have asked for the Water Control District to annex Spring High School, Spring 9th Grade Center, McNabb Elementary Center, and also the Hardy Road facility, which is the old transportation facility that currently houses maintenance and the Nagy Pavilion. And the reason for doing that is that would secure water and wastewater capacity for Spring ISD for the foreseeable future. So once we have an agreement in place, then our water capacity and our wastewater capacity with the Water Control District is secured. Technically, right now, it's not secured since we're receiving those services through consent. And so the give and take is we'll contribute our proportionate amount of the capital needs and the annexation costs to the Water Control District. And in return, we'll be annexed into the Water Control District so that our wastewater and water services will be secured. The reason we've added the Hardy Road facility, which isn't currently being serviced by the Water Control District, is because the Hardy Road facility has been on a water well. That well has since dried up. And we are currently bringing water in through other means to that site, and we need a permanent connection for that site as well. The Water Control District backs up to the back end of the Hardy Road facility, and it's just a short connection point from our facilities to their district. And so we felt like it was a good opportunity for us to include that in this agreement with the Water Control District. And we feel like this is kind of a mutual win-win. There is a cost to that. And to speak a little bit maybe about the cost to that, I'd like to pass it over to Ms. Westbrooks.
Yes, so there's a debt service schedule that's in here. And so the district will actually begin paying on a monthly basis, just shy of $5,000 each month. And we opted for the monthly basis versus just paying $900,000 up front, because that's about what would have happened had we annexed back in the late 70s, early 80s. And we pay our portion on a monthly basis, and it's part of our utility cost. And so annually, we're looking at just under $60,000 a year that we're having to budget for in order to pay this. Now, what it does also do for us is that any future improvements to their infrastructure that happens, we're also on the hook to pay our portion, which is about 35% as well. So it is an ongoing cost, but to Mr. Miranda's point, had we annexed many years ago, we would have just paid those costs over those years. So we're starting it now.
Ms. Westbrooks, I have a question. There is a large apartment complex being built across from McNabb, which is part of this water district. So if the percent that Spring ISD is consuming goes down to 20%, would we pay less?
I saw you raise your hand. Would you like to answer that question?
I believe the percent stays in a proportional amount. That may be a legal question, but it should stay in a proportional amount of our capacity usage. And so I believe that's an apartment complex that's being built in the old Choice T facility that was across the street from McNabb Elementary School. If you remember driving through there and seeing the big golf range, it'll now be an apartment complex. And so that will be part of WCID 99. I don't know if Jeremy, from a legal standpoint, but I do believe it will continue to be a proportionate amount for future capital costs.
So it won't stay at 30%. It may be whatever
It should not.
portion we are.
It should not, and we would have the ability, just as we did this time, to have those discussions with the water district.
That sounds fair. I should mention that I live in this district. And Mr. Binkley, is this something I should abstain from voting on?
Abstention would probably be the safest
Okay,
course
I'll
of
do
action
that.
here. And I will say that that's proportionate, like Mr. Miranda said, for future capital costs. Our $5,000 a month cost will not go down. That's cost that we could have paid up front, but we are paying over time. But any future capital costs should be proportional to our usage.
That water district has been really grateful for Spring ISD because you are the largest customer in a tiny water district that can use customers. Okay.
So what we would be recommending is that the board approve the annexation of Spring High School, McNabb Elementary School, and the old transportation tract, which is the Hardy Road track, into WCID 99, including any of the expenses associated with the annexation and the reimbursement of the expenses related to the Water Control District's bond repayment, which is their capital program.
Chief Miranda, how many water control districts are within our?
I don't know that number off the top of my head, but there are quite a few. Do you have any idea from our utility?
So do we have similar arrangements with all of them?
Those costs are typically built into our payment. And so, for example, when we have new facilities that are being built, there is a payment to the water control districts in any of the new sites that we have, like, for example, the new Roberson. There's always a payment to the water control district for that. And that'll help get us into the capacity for that district.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miranda.
You're
We
welcome.
will have this on our consent agenda for next week.
If Dr. Jenston needs to abstain, we shouldn't put it on.
Yes, next week at that time. So we will pull this out and have it separate item on the consent agenda.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So for our next item, I'd like to recognize General Counsel Jeremy Binkley.
All right, Madam President, trustees, I have a few different items for you tonight. I'm going to try to get through them quickly, but certainly as you have questions, please let me know. The first item you're going to find in the pink folder next to you. This is a resolution regarding school closures due to the winter storm. I'm going to credit Ann for the tagline here that as you look at it, it is complicated but fair. We've worked really hard to make sure that we appropriately captured the closures and the staff affected by those closures. And so rather than read all of these to you, we're just going to talk in regular language, not legal language, to let you know what's going on. So from a context standpoint, we knew the storm was coming. The police department staged officers beginning 2/14, February 14th, that's Sunday, to stay overnight. On February 15th, we closed the district for all staff through the 22nd. On the 23rd, we open for limited operations with year-long staff only. So anyone who was on a 226-day work calendar or less still did not come in on the 23rd. The 24th was an already planned asynchronous planning and preparation day for teachers. TEA advised that if we had one of those that week, to go ahead and keep it. We already had the waiver in place. And so as we go through this, you'll notice we are not seeking a waiver for 224 because we already have one there. Students were asynchronous at that time. For 225 and 226, we were, for the vast majority, open back to school in person or remote based on what students had selected. However, we did have 3 campuses that, due to damage, students were still remote at that time. And those were Burchett Elementary School, Bailey Middle School, and Twin Creeks Middle School. And so TEA had told us that they're going to allow districts to seek certain waivers. And so what this resolution does is it approves the administration to seek a waiver for 7 missed instructional days. That's the 215 to 219, and then 222 and 223. As I said, 224 was a planned asynchronous planning and prep day. It would also approve seeking a waiver for 2 days of 100% remote instruction for those specific campuses that were still closed due to damage. Again, Burchett, Bailey, and Twin Creeks. And then what we do is we identify 3 closure periods. The first closure period is 215 to 222. That's all employees except for police officers, and we'll talk about them in a minute. So that's all employees except police officers. Then we have the closure day of 223, which is all employees less than 226 calendar day employees. Finally, we have a period of 214 to 216. This is a special closure period for the police officers. And so during these closure periods, the relevant employees would get paid for the schedule they would have otherwise worked. Any non-exempt employees during this closure period will also get paid for any hours that they actually worked. This is in line with what we've always done. Normally we have one nice clean closure period. It may be a week. We close, all staff are out, all staff get paid what they would have gotten paid. And then if we have maintenance personnel and custodial personnel who have to come in to help mitigate damage, to do other things, we pay them for the hours that they actually came in. What we've done here is Ann, myself, and Chief Colbreth have worked quite a bit to figure out where the police department fits in. And so, as I said, the police department started staging employees on Sunday. We knew the storm was rolling in at around 4 o'clock. Officers started coming in to be ready to spend the night so that they could continue emergency response as needed. And then they continued to brave the icy roads and come into the police department on a reduced schedule for the next 2 days, again, to help continue that emergency response and to relieve those who had been in the department overnight and for a long period of time. Working closely with the command staff at the police department, it was determined that the 214 to 216 closure period would be the most appropriate closure period for the police department. After that, they will get paid simply for the hours that they worked starting 217. It's our understanding that no police officers will be penalized for this. And of course, the big intent here is that no employees be penalized for the district closure due to the winter storm. And so that was a lot of information about a very complicated resolution. If you have any questions now, I'd love to hear them. If you have questions, I'm going to ask to put it on consent, but of course, if you have questions for Tuesday, you are certainly welcome to ask them there as well.
Mr. Binkley, on the last page, the third to the last, further resolved, it reads odd to me. It says district finds that a waiver for 7 missed instructional days.
Should that just be a waiver for 7?
It should, and thank you. I can't tell you how many times I have read through this thing, and we will fix that.
Thank you.
So it will read that a waiver for 7 missed instructional days. And I've been kind of watching. It looks like some people may still be reading. If you're still reading, please, I don't want to rush anybody.
Does anyone else have any concerns?
Okay, and
Again,
again,
feel free to know that on Tuesday night, after you've looked over this some more, if you have any questions, we can, or concerns, we can stop and address them on Tuesday. Okay. Mr. Brinkley, please continue.
okay, so my next item is going to be a first reading of some changes to board policies EIA, EIC, and EIE. Those are going to start on page 47. And the reason those are all grouped together is because it's as far as the actual changes to the language are concerned, it's all the same reason, and they're very simple changes. Essentially, what we're doing is looking to go from a 6-week grading period cycle in elementary to a 9-week grading period cycle in elementary, which will then align our elementary grading periods with our middle school and high school. And with that, if you have questions, I'm going to defer to Dr. Hinojosa to answer those.
And Mr. Binkley, we're actually changing our secondary. So right now the secondaries are at 6 weeks. The middle school and the high school are at 6 weeks, and we're moving them to 9 weeks. And so as he said, we would be aligning all of our schools to a 9-week grading cycle.
Why the 9 over the 6?
That's a good question. Number one, aligning to all of our schools would keep, all of our parents on top of when report cards are coming for all children. If you have a little one, if you have a middle school, sometimes you get confused. But most importantly, as the committees met to discuss this, we talked a lot about our secondary students needing time to not only learn the skills and the concepts, but also to have the opportunity to show mastery. So we are extending their grading cycle from 6 weeks to 9 weeks. So more time for learning, more time for deepening those skills. And if there's any need to remediate, we can do that along the way. The other piece of the commitment is for our parents, we would be alerting the parents every 3 weeks. So even though it's a 9-week grading cycle, every 3 weeks, they would get updates or what we call our progress reports.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And the other piece to note is we are also aligning to several districts in our surrounding areas. As you know, we have a mobile population, so it makes an easier transition for the students that move into our district.
Winford, did you want to speak now?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Okay, I have a text comment. In EIA local, you say 9-week, which is, I think, the proper way to do it. That's the way in science, at least, we always do units. However, in EIC local, on page 50, you're saying third 9 weeks. Can't you say third 9-week? Or do you want to keep it in third 9 weeks?
I think what is, and we can definitely check that, Dr. Jensen, and it might just be us in there, but what we've seen and the proper way we've seen it before is 9-week grading cycle, but we will make sure and align all of the policies.
I just thought I'd point that out. Also, whenever I get these policies that have a little error, or not a little error, but a little change, I like to read through the policy because I pick up on things every time I do that. And I am worried about the kindergarten rating. On page 56, at the very top, this doesn't make sense to me. Students in pre-kindergarten shall not be retained. I understand that.
Mhm.
But then it says students in kindergarten shall not be retained unless the grade placement committee unanimously determines. So children can be retained in kindergarten, right? But not pre-kindergarten.
Right.
Is that what it's saying?
Yes,
Okay.
so we allow the retention in kindergarten, but we do require that grade placement committee, which includes the teacher of kindergarten, a first grade teacher in this case, because it's always the teacher above, a principal, and the parent involved. So yes, they can be retained in kindergarten, but we also ask that a committee really evaluate the student to ensure that there is a need for retention, or is the student, promoted with interventions provided. So it provides that security for the child.
Okay, on page 55, when you're talking about standards for mastery in pre-kindergarten and kindergarten 1 and 2, you have a scale from 1 to 5, but you're telling the teachers that things should be marked 3 or higher. Are you having the lower parts of that scale, the 1 and 2, just to make parents feel better that their child is getting a 3 or a 4 or 5? Why do you have a 5-point scale and when you can't use the 1 or 2?
It's well, and I'm gonna ask that, I'm gonna review that to make sure. But when we are, the way it's written is that if they are reported to be satisfactory understanding, if we mean satisfactory understanding, then the points have to be 3 or higher. On the report card itself, it states satisfactory understanding. So you need to really have the report card next to this policy. And if we are checking them off or marked as satisfactory understanding, then on this scale, it needs to be 3 or higher. You can't say that in the progress report, the student was satisfactory understanding and then give them a 2. Does that make sense? If we're saying satisfactory, it needs to be higher, a 3 or higher.
I understand that rationale. However, if you look at this statement, it's an obligatory statement. It said that according to those pre-kindergarten guidelines, they shall be marked on the district progress monitoring report as satisfactory understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So every pre-kindergarten student is going to be rated that. It shall be.
Mm-hmm. I'd have to really check on that, Dr. Jensen. It's not coming to me. It is a local policy, so oftentimes we use exactly what was given to us. So if you'll allow me some time to check up on that and see if that's exactly the way we got it, or if we at the district level made an adjustment to this policy.
Especially
because I interpret that to say if it's a 1 and a 2, then it's unsatisfactory.
But it says they shall be satisfactory in 2 places here. All pre-kindergarten students shall be satisfactory. Since we have this nice new pre-kindergarten curriculum that we've just adopted, I would hope that maybe we could have a more meaningful scale for parents to see what pre-K students are actually doing and what they are accomplishing. Okay, that's my comment.
No, we'll certainly
I'm
take a
sorry,
look
Drew.
at that.
hijack that.
No, that's quite all right, Dr. Jensen. I know we were focusing on the secondary, but like you said, it always gives us the opportunity to review the entire policy. So give me the opportunity to look at that pre-kindergarten and exactly what it's stating, because I'm reading it one way, but I see exactly what you're saying. And also in light of the new curriculum we just adopted, it'll give us a minute to stop and look and see if adjustments need to be made in their report card, in their progress reports. They receive theirs every 12 weeks. So this will give us a time and the space to review it and make any necessary adjustments to reflect the curriculum that was just adopted at our last meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions on the EI series before I go to update 116? Okay, so our next two items are from update 116. As you know, generally twice a year, TASB provides us with some suggested policy revisions and some legal revisions. The first part of our review of update 116 on page 61 is going to be notification of legal updates. The board has been provided I believe it was a 300 and roughly 30 to 80 page packet with all of the different updates. What we've also provided you are the explanatory notes. As you'll recall, legal policy includes statutes, agency regulations, and case law relating to key areas of district operations. They are not adopted by the board. These updates are primarily due to revisions in the Texas Administrative Code. And with that, I will ask if you have any questions regarding the legal updates, but as we've done in the past, we're not going to walk through them specifically.
They're legally required.
I'm sorry?
I said they're legally required.
They are. These are really provided for convenience. So, that whether we had them in policy or not, they would govern our work. But what this does is it really helps bring it all together when you see a local policy and you want to be able to look at, what are the statutes, what are the case law that's governing the way the district is operating. It provides a really good resource for anyone who's looking at policy, trying to figure out why something is working the way it works.
I enjoyed the little summaries. I didn't read the 300 pages. Okay. I thought it was interesting that you need a accountant or auditor for your district to actually be an accountant in Texas, which is, I thought, rather nice. But on page 65, I saw a change I have not seen before, which I thought was important. Under DAA legal, employment objectives equal employment opportunity. Look at the second to the last sentence where it says you're not allowed to use disabilities or genetic information. That's the first time I've seen that. And I think that's important here because the more people have their genetic code deciphered and finding unhappy surprises, that the employers might discriminate on that. So I just thought that was very interesting.
Excellent. Are there any other questions regarding the legal updates? And of course, as anything ever comes up, if there are legal questions regarding the legal policy, we can certainly look at those at the
Just
time
one
as
more
well.
thing.
Oh, yes.
On page 67 at the very bottom, FL legal. I knew we were trying to find missing students because they are probably at home getting homeschooled or moved out of the district. But this is using student records to try to find missing students who may have been child trafficking or killed or whatever. Is that what I'm reading here?
So my understanding of this provision is actually that if we are notified by law enforcement that a student or a former student has gone missing and is now a missing child, we are to flag those records. And if we get a request, like a T-Rex request for records from another school district or a request from out of state, we are then supposed to notify that law enforcement agency so that they can then go and find that student. So the hope would be that the missing student turns up somewhere, and then we notify the law enforcement agency of who's requesting the record so they can investigate further.
We're talking about abductions. Abductions.
Abductions, or like you said, trafficking, or any of those situations where a student may turn up in another district or another location at some point, and they try to re-enroll in school. Okay, if there are no other questions, we will go finally to the 4 local policy updates from 116 on. These will be fairly quick. One new thing to notice here, we've always provided the policies with the markup, the red, green, and blue, to show strikes, additions, and reorganizations. What we've done this time as well is put the final unmarked up version of the policy behind those. Sometimes the policies are so marked up, you start to have trouble reading what it actually says. And the markups are extremely helpful, but we felt that this may provide a little bit additional clarity as well. So we'll start on page 69 with CQB. This change is fairly minor. It delegates to the superintendent the authority to determine the cybersecurity training program that's going to be used by the district. TASB has indicated the change was made to simplify compliance with state law. So rather than the board having to identify the cybersecurity program and approve it, this will delegate that to the superintendent. Of course, it still has to be a program that's been approved by the Texas Department of Information Resources. But if a switch needs to be made, it allows the superintendent to make that switch. Page 72 is DCD local. What this does is it basically adds language to clarify that an at-will employee who is disciplined or terminated may appeal that discipline or termination in accordance with board policy DGBA. That's our employee grievance policy. Previously, it said that they may appeal it to the board through DGBA. Well, the board is level 3, but I think this just clarifies that you have to go through levels 1 and 2 before you get to come to the board, which was the intent of the policy all along. Page 75 is FFAC local. This is actually the policy that triggered us to say we need to give you the final unmarked up version behind it. If you look at it, there are a lot of changes here. Essentially, what they're doing is updating the policy to reflect current guidance from the Department of State Health Services. We have reviewed this closely with Nurse Parker because she is our medical expert in the administration. She has looked at it, has given us her blessing, says that it does align with the district practice, and she doesn't have any concerns about it. Now, you'll notice in here, and Dr. Jensen pointed out, because the governance committee has reviewed all of these policies, and at that time, Dr. Jensen asked about the removal of the language allowing a student to self-administer asthma or anaphylaxis medication. The reason that was removed is because that language is already included in the legal policy. So students can still self-administer, but as we've discussed in the past, TASB and the district as well, we're trying to remove some of that redundant language. So if it changes in legal, we're not also going to have to change it in local. We're trying to not duplicate that information. If it's already in legal, we remove it from local so that it's a little cleaner. And then our last policy is GKA local on page 81. There is one change in that policy, and it's regarding a member of the public who has been ejected from or banned from a district facility. They have the right to appeal through the district's grievance process in the public grievance process in the G series. And We just have to make sure that they can get to the board through levels 1, 2, and then to level 3 within 90 days. And what they've done is added the word calendar to clarify that that is 90 calendar days, not 90 district business days. Clearly, there's a big difference between those two, but that's the only addition is the word calendar. And with that, I knew we kind of rushed through those. Do y'all have any questions about any of these policies? And of course, this is first reading. You'll have another opportunity next month with the second reading if you think of anything. But I would ask that we place these on the consent agenda for Tuesday night.
Thank you, Mr. Binkley. This will be on the consent agenda for Tuesday night. Our next item, I'd like to again recognize Chief Financial Officer Ann Westbrooks.
Thank you, President Newhouse, and board members, if you could turn with me to page 85. For our first item this evening is the taxpayer refunds. I'd like to ask if there are any questions on the list.
Ms. Westbrooks, it
Yes.
seems like there's fewer adjustment refunds. Is that your impression?
On this particular list, yes, ma'am. It does seem that way.
So
There's
it's not a reduction in
No, there's not
people
anything.
contesting their taxes paid. Okay.
No, ma'am. There hasn't been anything significant that spoke to that particular reduction in the number that we're seeing. I think it's just coincidental. There are no questions or additional questions on that item. The next item is on page 88, and it's our monthly review of cooperative purchases that were over $50,000.
Ms. Westbrooks, are we saving money on copy paper? With only half the students in school?
We're definitely saving, that's for sure. I don't think we've substantiated, like gone through and calculated how much we've saved. But normally, I think we bring this one about once every couple of months, and this may be about the third time we've had to do it this year. So there is some savings. Our next item is on page 90, which is the annual engagement letter for our external auditors to conduct the annual audit for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2021. And so we've already begun scheduling our interim audit, which will begin on April 27th with Whitley Penn having their team conducting the audit virtually. And as always, they start the interim audit documenting our internal controls, working with our our distribution center team and looking at inventory and those items with the interim audit. And then they'll come back in September and do the annual audit and issue an opinion on our financial statements. And if there are no additional or no questions on that item, then our last item for the evening is on page 102. And it is a request for proposal for library resources. And as you can see by the extensive list that's on page 103, we have qualified all of the vendors who responded as being capable of providing the services to the district, and that we would select the vendor that best meets the district's needs at the time. from the list of awarded vendors. So the district is recommending that we award the ability to do business with all 44 of the responding vendors.
I think I need to address this question to Dr. Watson. Are we ever thinking of going digital on books?
We are currently, we do have, as we had talked about, I think in another meeting with Mr. Adams, we do have digital textbooks available. We just purchased this year, we know we have a library shortage in our area. So we did purchase Mayan, which provides kids digital library books, access to hundreds of digital library books. So they can check them out online and have them on their Chromebooks. And so we are beginning to experiment with that now, yes.
If there are no questions, President Newhouse, that was the last item under financial services.
Thank you, Ms. Westbrooks. That makes you the last item for tonight. There's no other items on tonight's agenda. So I will now entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting.
Madam President, I move we adjourn for the evening.
Second.
It's been moved by Winfred Adams Jr. and seconded by Justine Durant to adjourn this meeting. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries unanimously. There's no further business. This meeting is officially adjourned at 8:32 p.m.